This is John Drabinski, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant-sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, and everyone in between, culture workers and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Zebulon Miletsky, who teaches in the Department of Africana Studies at Stony Brook University. In addition to a number of public-facing and scholarly pieces, he is the author of Before Busing, A History of Boston's Long Black Freedom Struggle, published in 2022. In this discussion, we explore the nature of Black Studies inquiry, the link between Black study and public knowledge, and the future culture and politics of the field. Good morning, Zebulon. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Good morning.
Well, I know that for both of us, we're recording this on our first day of classes of the spring semester of 2025. So it's in a bleak moment of the rise of a far-right government. And on that day, we all both dread and kind of love, I assume, of the first day of classes. It's nice for me, anyway, to just get this pause and have a chance to talk about the field of Black studies together. So I really appreciate you making the time and look forward to this.
Yeah, same here. It's an auspicious moment. I'm glad to be on with you.
So a lot of reasons why I'm interested or excited about having you in the series. There's your research. I think the kind of things you do on housing, urban history, and Black studies is super important for the field, super interesting. Also, and I always like to point this out, you're someone who has a degree in the field, has a doctoral degree in the field, and work in the field. And I know I speak for my collaborator, Ashley, as well. We're really happy when we get people with doctoral work in the field talking about it, because I think it's a very different perspective than coming to Black studies from a discipline or sort of mid-career or later career. So for all those reasons, really excited to have you in the series, have your voice here. And before we get into sort of how you imagine Black studies, how you think about your research in relation to it, I wanted to ask you really just a question about your own journey. You know, what drew you to the study of Black life? What drew you to Black study? And for me, always the interesting part of that, which is what sustains you and keeps you connected to the field.
Yeah, that's, something I think about occasionally myself, and for me, it was just sort of a pursuit of trying to answer some questions. I grew up biracial guy from Boston, very proud of, my African-American heritage. My father's Jewish American. That was interesting growing up, especially in a city like Boston, which most people, know to be kind of very divided. And so, all of those things left me with, I would say, a combination of curiosity and even maybe some trauma, in a sense, of just kind of constantly being like shocked by different things that would happen. This thing called race, as you get older, it begins to sink in. There's a long prehistory here that led up to this, and as one matures, you also realize you're not the center of the universe. It's like a lot of things that are going on. You're just kind of thrown into it. But
Some people mature to that.
I'm still working on it myself. But yeah, trying to. I mean, I'm a very common sense kind of person. I just sort of I'm like, okay, there's major problems. There's some wild stuff, and it affects me. I see it affects my family, and it affects these sort of larger questions. And I've learned over the years that as I began to self-identify as African American, basically, which is complicated because this is not a visual podcast, so nobody can see me. But it's not. Some people racially ambiguous, I guess, term that one would use, and people don't necessarily know off the bat what my background is. They see something and they're sort of like, it's ambiguous. It's like a question mark, I guess. And then, anyway, you put things together. We do that in the U.S. Name, last name Miletsky. That's not really helping. And then okay, Zebulon, and maybe so so. Um, so yeah, I think that was it for me. It was just really this journey. Um, One that I'll say that I almost was bullied out of or pushed out of. Had I been maybe a little, I don't know, either not as adamant about finding the answers, or maybe just stubborn person, somewhere in
Yeah.
between those two things, and just kept, take the hits, take some of the hits. It makes you a little stronger, tougher. And then when I really started studying Black history, you realize how much. This is a more recent sort of revelation on my part, but that all this stuff about identities, it's the experience of being Black is one of taking hits, and people have taken much stronger hits than I ever had to. So that kind of like kept me going, I guess. And but as I think about it, there were a lot of times where I could have been dissuaded from moving forward, and not just in terms of Black studies, but even as identification as a proud Black, man. That's also hard. It's hard for some people. Some people can't accept it, and it's okay. I understand that, but the beautiful thing is Black studies, Black history in particular, it immediately began to clarify questions that I had. Start learning about it. There were other people that were as light-skinned as I am and lighter, who identified as Black, who made their mark, and who contributed to the uplift or the forward progress of the race. And that was incredibly edifying. It was about college, when I started to see that. And but it also comes with a host of other meta lessons and more complicated truths about race in America that have come more recently as I've grown, gotten older, I guess. And so I'm glad I didn't, give up, or let the critics, or the whoever, intimidate me out of continuing to pursue these questions and this knowledge. And so eventually you begin to realize you're devoted your life to this now. It's because it probably takes about a lifetime to really come to the wisdom to make a contribution to this amazing field.
Yeah, and how did you? I'm also curious. I mean, you and I, we were both in the Pioneer Valley together. I was at Amherst College teaching, and you were a doctoral student in the Afro-American Studies program. I'm curious also, like how did you end up there? Sort of what drew you to that department? I mean, it's historic, prestigious department. So, I ask partly because this is like a shared place. We could talk about Antonio's or Amherst Coffee and all that, but really because that department, I mean, it stands out. It's unique. It's so historically significant and continues to be such an important place.
Yeah. I'd love to say I knew exactly what I was doing.
We always know exactly what we're doing.
Right. Yeah, sure. I mean, it's funny because I've noticed, the Bostonians and people from Massachusetts, we tend to stay near home, we especially Bostonians. It's kind of one mark of being from Boston is, never leave, It was hard for me too. It was hard for me.
Yeah.
It was very hard. I mean, even Amherst, it was like an hour and a half, 2 hours away. I'm like, whoa, this is a big step. And then, it was my first step, and then I kept going, and then I said, oh, there's a whole country. Like, yeah, but it's interesting because I was kind of like really between two polar opposites. That was at that time, there were still only maybe 2, 3, 4 PhD programs in African American studies. UMass being, I think, the second one after Temple, if I'm not mistaken. And then by then, timeline's a little fuzzy, but you got Yale, and then Harvard was about to roll out. And I had, when I was an undergrad, I went to Boston College. I had gotten involved at the Harvard department, working kind of like just as a research assistant when I was an undergrad. I was working with Henry Louis Gates and some of the people there. It's not as glamorous as it might sound. I was fetching things from the library. I got kind of good at it. I was a pretty good researcher. That's why I realized, I could research. I could do some research, and that was satisfying. But I say that to say that, and then there was they had this encyclopedia project they were doing then, Africana. Yeah. And I kind of was involved with that. I wrote a few entries and stuff. And I mentioned it because that was really, are you going to try to go to Harvard for their African American Studies department, or I was looking at UMass. And I had actually, the funny thing is I applied, I shouldn't admit this, but it was my second time applying to UMass. I guess I really wanted to go there because I did apply. I almost made it the first time, and then I got in the second time. And there was a pull about from there. I think I was drawn to the more radical aspects of the teaching and the knowledge base and approach. I've always been had a heart for grassroots, just sort of in there somewhere. And Harvard's program wasn't starting until the following year. We'd have to wait essentially. And so, not that I don't know if I would have got in or not, but I couldn't wait. And I was applying around, and I applied to UMass. The other place I got in was Cornell, which had at that time a really great master's program in Africana studies. Some legends over there. But this being PhD and made a reasonable stipend and that kind of thing, I said I could do this. And it was all in the stars, because the first person I spoke to there was William Strickland.
Wow.
And
you jump right into the legendary status.
I know, but this was purely a Roxbury thing, because Bill's from Roxbury, from Boston. I mean, I don't know, just like a magnet. I just was drawn to him. I couldn't even explain why, and I didn't even know he was from Boston yet. But it was something about him, his energy. Who knows? I don't know. Yeah, he was the first. The conversation was abrupt. I remember that, and short. But I was. I guess I liked it. It was the critical aspect of it was a breaking down to build you back up kind of thing. And you really were stripped there fairly quickly of any pretense or what you thought you knew. And man, it's like the equivalent of just being like thrown against the wall intellectually.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, you're not selling the program to our more sensitive listeners, but with love. I mean,
that was years ago, though. Yeah,
I'm sure it's a lot nicer now. I mean, in some ways, you've probably started to answer this question, but I wanted to ask you, and again, as I said, I think this, all these conversations with people who have PhDs in Black studies that have a different kind of tone to them, but especially around, I think, this question. And I'm interested in how you imagine the field of Black studies, how it operates in your intellectual and political imagination, especially in relationship to its origin, right? Its origin being that question of intellectual life, that disciplines hadn't represented Black life in any kind of significant way. And so the demand for Black studies was a demand for that representation of intellectual traditions, expressive culture, and so forth. But of course, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, that was also the time of a real radicalization of Black liberation struggle that had broken down that distinction between community and campus, had broken down that distinction between study and prescriptive action. And so that tension, I think, continues to be a part of how we imagine and even practice Black studies. So I always like to ask people, how do you think about the field of Black studies? How do you imagine it? But specifically shaped around this original tension in the field.
Yeah, that's a great question. Very well sort of stated. Now, I guess I'll start with the community activism leg, I guess, which is crucial. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And I'm saying that just because there's no way around the fact that Black Studies comes into the academy from that lens. And I want to be specific. I mean, like, community organizers hired to teach Black Studies courses early on. Uh, folks who their credential in a sense was that they didn't have the academic credentialing, and they were known, I guess, known commodities in their areas, and geographically, I mean. And so that's important. And I don't think it could have happened any other way, because academia was just such an exclusive zone. I mean, just people
Yep.
weren't didn't cross over that borderline into the campus even, or feel, and definitely didn't feel welcomed, I'm sure. But then there was just no place for it. So it's the intellectual version again too of sort of breaking through the doors, um, trying different things, throwing things against the wall to see what sticks. Um, the aspect of student demand is crucial to the sort of chemical makeup of Black Studies, because it's, and you you look at how many Black Studies departments started, it's not always the same story, but it's like sort of similar. Those students took over this building in 68 or 69. The students demanded, and that's how that is how the field or discipline, start is created, from that demand. It's very easy, for a lot of uh, the people who came through the more traditional way to probably think, sort of like not give that very much credit, because it's not purely intellectual uh, thing. But what other, when you're shut out completely, and then there's this sudden major demand fueled by the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. That's also an important part, I think, because it's the sympathy, or the feelings of guilt, whatever. All of those things happen around the right time, I guess, to create, this opportunity where now, where is the Black Studies program or classes going to be on the campus? We have to find a hall, we have to find a floor or something, office. So it's a making room for pushed by a demand for something that the offside of that, the other side of that, I mean, is that for that reason, I think on many campuses, the discipline doesn't always get the respect that it should from other more so-called traditional disciplines, and which no one ever questions the existence of. No one ever questions the need for it. Like no one had to take over a building to have the chemistry department or something.
Yeah.
And it was never. It just doesn't factor. But to many universities' credit, I think understanding, well, we have to radically restructure some things here, even if some people's goal was to, or didn't think it would go the distance, right? I think a lot of people thought, oh, this is a trend, this is something that's happening, and especially if you happen to be one of the only Black people on a campus already, and then this thing called Black Studies comes crashing in, that sometimes that might cause internal inter-community friction, and all the above. It did all of that. It was all kinds of feelings, emotions, and they're strong. And but a political movement doesn't ask for permission. It comes crashing through the door.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's super interesting. Thank you. And I think, I was especially struck when you were talking about the student demand and how do we, in the field, how do we fit that into our imagination? I think that's a really tough question. I mean, I think about my own department here, University of Maryland, and my previous department at Amherst College. I don't know what the students look like. We don't have photos of them. We don't have their words. We don't have their letters. We don't have their editorials. We don't have recordings of any of their speeches. I mean, it is interesting to think about how we remember the field and how we have it as part of what we do and part of our imagination at all those levels. And I'm so all that's just to say, I'm so glad that you said student demand and stuck with that. I think sitting with that is something that we all need to do. And, I mean, maybe I'm just talking about myself. Maybe everybody's different, but I actually don't spend very much time doing that. And this is a reminder that's an ethical problem, right? That actually, if we're going to try to honor the people who risked everything, it was a real risk. I mean, occupying a building. I mean, at Cornell, they carried guns, and
Exactly.
I mean, this is people. People are risking a lot about their lives, including sometimes their actual, mortal lives. And then we practice it and sort of, remembering that the student demand rather than the poet and the artist and the activists coming to the classroom. I mean, all of these things happen. So anyway, I'm just running with this because I think this is super interesting. And I'm really glad that you said it. Like, what does it mean to remember student demand as an idea and as a set of persons? So yeah, thank you for that. Well, let me ask you a little bit about your work. And I can see, how your work on political history and urban studies. I mean, it is very interested in the people, right? So I can see how this is also practiced in your scholarship, this location of where vital centers are. But I'm interested for you to talk a little bit about how your orientation and your contribution to the field as a scholar, how you see it as fitting in the history of the field of Black studies, and what, if any, new boundaries do you think it pushes?
Yeah. Well, I got my kind of, I did come into things through a sort of an activist lens and from organizer lens. I don't know what, I don't want to say organizers, but people in the communities in Boston pushing for things, going to meetings, sort of just grew up with that sensibility. So I guess, yeah, and it's true that the people, that is at the heart a lot of what I'm doing. I do have deep social concerns and want to make highlight that. I think most of us in the field do, and but I think that's definitely what drew me to the urban studies stuff. I kind of like to be sort of like, I guess I'm a bit of a problem solver, where I like to look at a social problem and I see where this went left or right, conversation goes off the rails here or doesn't, and we have to, I've learned this over the years as a historian, we have to make room for the unpredictable, for the little weird things about human beings. I mean, look at hence where we are right now, but I'm sure we'll come back to that later. But in the history and analysis, some things happened by fluke, some things were not grand, kind of like plans and stuff. It just sort of took place. And so like I really like the ability, as enjoyed when I finally got the book done, enjoyed writing about that in my book Before Busing, which is basically about Boston and the Black freedom struggle there leading up to the school desegregation. I mean, it's real simple. Again, I am very common sense kind of person. This was the most agonizing and difficult social problem I think that's ever, I want to, at least in the 20th century, but probably for almost all of Boston's history. Um, People lament this moment as one of the saddest, in Boston's history, one of the most difficult, tangled path, with pathologies of all kinds of different things, uh, in terms of how the history itself was written, how the history was lived. Um, I think Boston being, this sort of city that's sort of beloved by a lot of people, or there's an affection. Um, and so many people have come through there. It's a daunting subject to take on, actually, because
Yeah.
it's not like simple stuff. But this again, growing up, it does have a lot to do with my background because that was the most painful, most confusing episode in the history of Boston, and one that people were constantly discussing, talking about. And so, maybe subconsciously, I just wanted to, learn what I needed to learn so I could make a contribution to that conversation, and even do more than that to try to, really historicize it, document it, explain some of it. But from a black, there's no, from a black studies lens, because I've felt, still feel, that without that perspective, you don't have that full. You're missing something. You're missing a lot. I stand behind the field 100% in that way. Wouldn't want to be in any other field because the tools, the lenses, the frameworks, the needed way of thinking or an understanding of how that kind of I had a chance to study with like people like John Bracey at UMass. Pretty much became my mentors, the late John Bracey, and he had a very sort of surprising way of explaining things about Black people, things you didn't expect, and things you never heard before, And so I said, well, that's good, because if this problem, maybe the reason we couldn't solve the school desegregation discussion as well is because we were lacking that way of knowledge and understanding about how Black folks are treated. People love to debate the nuances of school desegregation and busing, but this is, again, it's like the Black studies stuff. People were like, we're going to get an education for our children if we have to crash through the doors of the school committee, if it requires us to, if that's the setup that only the white schools are getting resources, then we'll try that. Even we're going to do what we have to do to educate our children. Best believe that was clear, and I think that's really all that anyone needs to know, because when you don't factor that in, and most of that discussion in Boston never had Black people at the heart of it, which is no shock to me, but it didn't have Black people at the heart of it. And so your analysis is often missing, because that's the key part. That's why Boston was remade and changed, because of the need and the direction and the really savvy organizing too. Boston, the whole city was changed by Black families and their children, a small group. And that's the truth that no one really wants to say. And so go to all these other things. Because sometimes I think, much like the South after Reconstruction, you don't want to admit that you lost. You just can't admit you lost the battle and the war. And now your space is going to be reconstructed, changed to something different. You're going to have to render under Caesar and work with that. That's what happened in Boston. Nobody wants to tell be honest about that story, because they can't. It just upends so many of the conclusions. If your mentality and ideology is that Black people are inferior or don't have enough intelligence, then you can't concede and admit that they whipped your butt in the federal court and changed the whole city. To put it very simply.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've given a great pitch for lots of things, including your book, but also a reminder that, thinking about, where because I think about this question, just ask, thought about a question as well about, where do I think of your work as pushing new boundaries? I mean, part of it is to start thinking about Boston, as you have just said, thinking about Boston as part of the Black Studies landscape. And as so much of the Black Studies landscape is, Chicago, Detroit, Harlem, South broadly, maybe Los Angeles, Bay Area, especially around militancy, but Boston reemerging, right, as a central question to thinking about Black studies, community, history, politics, and all of that. I love that your book does that your research does that, but the way you put it just now, I think is so important about thinking about that experience. The analogy with Reconstruction is fascinating. Right. What is that moment of denial of having lost, and how does it have a long wake?
Yeah, yeah. And some people saw it, and some of the white politicians admitted, that Reconstruction has finally come to the North with a vengeance. One of them said, I think it was, and yes.
Whether people mean that in a positive sense or negative sense will tell you a lot about the person. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like sports. Like this is like, some people are like good losers, good winners, or, able to have that sort of sportsmanship to say, hey, good game, you got us, and others can't. And so as a historian, I look for the people who were like that, who could admit, or concede the point. Or I don't know, maybe they were just thinking out loud or whatever. But if you conceded the point, I'm finding it, and I put it in the book because I think that's important. That's it helps to make the argument, because there were some level-headed people, including the mayor. He was an interesting individual. He had all the, I don't know. He's complicated. Mayor White, Kevin White. Somebody needs to write more about him because it was a very interesting person in a lot of ways.
Yeah, the sports analogy, Boston's never been good at its teams losing. I think Bill Buckner would would say the loss part is hard, but they left the winners. Well, let me ask you a little bit then, just continue with what some of the stuff you were talking about before about your doctoral work, because your PhD's in Afro-American Studies in the W.B. Du Bois Department at UMass, and you work in Africana Studies now. And what's interesting to me is that your trajectory, both in terms of education and work, is outside of disciplinary work. You talked about as an historian, but your own education is in area studies. And so I'm interested to hear how you think that essentially your adult intellectual life training and teaching and researching, being outside of disciplines, how that's impacted your research, but also if you want, also maybe speak a little bit to your classroom. How does it change how you've constructed a classroom because you're not constructing it inside a discipline?
Yeah, that was a key decision back in the day, whether to do African American Studies, interdisciplinary field or area of studies field versus history. I did apply. I forgot to mention that I got into, I think it was Boston College, I believe. I want to make sure of that because that's my alma mater, but I think it was BC. I got for a master's in history, if I remember correctly. And thank you, BC. But it was a sort of definitely crossroads kind of thing. I often tell this story, speaking in my classes. I tell this story in class, which is a true story. And when I was at Boston College, I had a lot of mentors. There was one in particular. He was like a graduate student, kind of counselor or something, assigned counselor to us. And all I know is I used to meet with him periodically, and he was doing not a master's, he was doing a PhD, I believe, he was doing a master's, but he was about to be doing a PhD. So I asked him, I'm kind of on a crossroads here, thinking about doing history or African American Studies. What do you think? Now, he's a proud Black man, very well versed and so on, and to my mind, at least at the time, sort of I just accorded that knowledge to him, which he had, which he showed and exuded. But he actually told me, he told me you should do history because he said, if African American people are seen as less than a degree in African American studies is also going to be seen as less than. I'm surprised by that. I guess, I tapped into something, a deeper root there. I don't know. But I obviously chose to do African American studies, and that was the best choice for me. But it's funny. I mean, he wasn't completely wrong in a sense. It wasn't the right choice for me. But
look, most Black Studies departments are populated by people with PhDs outside Black Studies. So yeah, I mean,
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, that's right. And so you never know what it's best for me. That's all I could say. It was the best. It's the best fit for me because I don't know. I never had any ambition to really become a professor, but for my experience in Black Studies, it was on that track and trying to answer those questions. I wanted to know the literature stuff. I wanted to know. I want to know the history. I want to know the social sciences, economics, political science, because the difference between sort of the professionalization of having, a track and I'm trained in this sense and this is what I am and so on, versus trying to an all out pursuit to get answers and to support the ambitions, stories, history, and hopes, dreams, fears of a people, and try to if your project is to uplift Black people in a sense, and not the exclusion of others, to uplift people of color or other groups. But if if that's what you're kind of aiming at, and not just uplift, but trying to answer the questions that have pulled and tugged at the highest levels of our society, right? I mean, the moments that we're living in now are all, of course, draw from our long walk in history with race and all these questions. So then, it's funny how life is, but if that's your project, then an interdisciplinary is probably better, because you're going to get a little bit of all the things you need to try to speak back, right? Not necessarily just to win awards or that's, but to keep at the heart your project of uplift. That's, so I don't know. I mean, it's some simplistic answer, I guess, but that's
not simplistic at all. That's like politically very intense and existential and really meaningful. No, it's the opposite. No, I love that. Yeah. Well, let me ask, your PhD's in the field, you work in the field. So reflecting on Black studies sort of historically into the present, what do you think the field has done particularly well? And what do you think it has not done particularly well?
Well, I think the thing that's done well is expanding, in terms of in that quest for the answers, right? In, keeping, if that's sort of the central focus is the finding the answers, trying to solve some of the problems, explain some of the discrepancies, what looks like X might be Y, and doing that, which is what Black Studies does. There's a little sleight of hand in these kinds of things, sarcasm or humor, or even pathos. Would do literally backflips, anything, whatever. A lot of us, and I know you do that kind of work in terms of that. That's always what I've known about you is how you do that with your students, and those of us who do that, who care about that, have that lightning flash in class. I think are going to keep, focused on that. That becomes sort of the most important. So I think what Black Studies has done well is it's expanded into other areas in order to incorporate it in its analysis. You know, work on the health care on slave ships. You know, trying to understanding public health, for example, population and demography studies. Um, you know, understanding urban studies and how we get food deserts, or the building of freeways in the 1950s and 60s that cut straight to the heart, and really made a major cataclysmic sort of effect on not just Black communities but a lot of other communities. um, so the expansion into those other areas, that it's a sign of vitality of the field. And the thing is, like, I have no doubt, I'm not under any illusion to the fact that, you know, all this recent stuff that we're seeing in this crackdown on essentially what we do
Hmm.
is not because of the inferiority of this discipline. It's because of its importance. It's because of its power
Yeah,
and effectiveness.
absolutely.
It has been effective. It has been it has been the dream of those who took over those buildings or invoked, that right, the student demand part, uh, that this would be a vital node to help in the uplift of Black people, has turned out to be true. Perhaps even, to a greater extent than anyone realized. So that's what I think the field has done well. What we've probably, maybe I'll just say it like that. I mean, maybe not. What we haven't done as well is not understanding the power of it. Because, and I say that because when and you know this, John, a lot of times when you go to different campuses, I appreciate the work of people like Abdul Kalimat, because he has taken taken surveys of all the different Black studies departments and the statistics. And he wrote that a book not too long ago. I think it's called The History of Black Studies. Originally John McWhorter, his original name Brother Abdul Kalimat. And if you've been to other campuses and different places, sometimes we're in the academic ghetto, so to speak. We are in the smaller building. We are in the corner of left for dead. Now, but what we maybe misunderstood was that was some sign of our weakness or lack of, because it's hard. I mean, it's hard to, notice the difference. You go into you go into the other department. They got the map. Oh, this is the map room. It's just all maps in here. Oh, nice. But this is the private library. This is endowments of all kinds and stuff. And then we don't always have that. But at the same time, you got a big range. From Harvard to Yale to, different, all in between. And other places, of time that we've all spent in Black studies spaces, different colleges and universities, all manifest differently. Just leave it like that. So maybe that's probably weakness.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like the reminder that, what we do is important and impactful, and in that way always troubling. And that's, but it's easy to forget because geography tells a story, right? The way where you walk around, and it can be hard to not, become obsessed with that rather than obsessed with it, obsessed with our own significance, right? Obsessed is maybe not the right word, but, preoccupied and concerned and, sort of, lean heavily into this idea that we're pushing a boundary. And our classroom setups, I mean, I don't think my department owns any classrooms. We're always borrowing from other people.
This is what I mean. So, yeah, those little bureaucratic things. And I mean, and that brings up too that other aspect, the professionalization part, because in this case, if depends on what institution is being desegregated or being changed in that way. Academia is that if eventually we have to render with all of those things too.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm just like, oh, I'm just all about only the people. I mean, in order to
There are people here too at the campus.
yeah. In order to do this effectively, though, you had to lock down all those things too, right?
Absolutely.
And so that is like also that shows that big change. Once the institutionalization of Black studies, I guess I'll call it. Say,
yeah. So let me ask you as a final question, and this continuing with this sort of the past of Black studies, doing well. What do we in the present need to do better or sort of advance on? And in that moment, in the context of the field of Black studies, what do you think is the issue we should all be thinking about, or the question that you would want us all to be asking?
Wow, that's a big question. I guess it's impossible for me not to reflect on sort of our current moment. This is difficult because we are, in a lot of ways, maybe unexpectedly, on the precipice of the success, however that may be defined, for this field or for this larger racial project, if you will. Again, confidence is important. I guess confidence is important in the sense because it'd be very easy to read the moment right now, which is and I don't want to be vague here. I guess I'm talking about the recent election, talking about the crackdown on DEI, the outlawing, which seems to be heading in that direction, outlawing of teaching Black history and in many ways, by implication, Black studies.
Yeah.
Though I haven't quite seen a full frontal attack on Black studies, strictly speaking. I'm sure there has. I mean, the attack on Black history is a shot to the bow, obviously, to the core, because it's so excuse me, such an important part of the discipline. But we got choices to make now. I'll just give an example. Like, for a long time, I've said it myself. I have said this myself. I don't want to be a hypocrite, but we all say, you hear people say things like, African American history is part of American history, right? In that even conceptualization, there's a lot of problematics for Black studies, right? Because, well, then if that's true, then why do people ask me this? Well, if African American history is American history, then why Black studies? Why do we have the Africana studies department separate from the history department? And I think maybe some people's original vision was that, like how they say about community organizations, that we would work ourselves out of existence eventually. The need for this corrective, short-term, maybe temporary corrective, by short-term, I don't know, 50 years, that's where we are, would eventually resolve itself. And we'd ultimately make that argument that African American history is, I'm just dealing with history here, but is part of America. Now, so I think that we have to be, first of all, I never agreed with that. I never really fully agreed with it. I have said it probably, but it's when we say things like that, because I think I want to say now, in the moment of now, as Black studies scholars at whatever age or part of our careers, we have to really become mature in the sense where we don't entertain ideas that really don't make a lot of sense, that don't make that much sense. That if we strip that down, that kind of approach to Black studies, and it's no offense to anyone, I'm not, to anyone who does feel that way, but
sure.
But it's kind of an assimilationist sort of approach. It's not unlike, it's almost like all lives matter kind of thing, right? If that were true, then we would already be at the heart of that conversation. If if African American history was American. Now, I understand what people mean when they say it, and like I said, I've said it before too. It's a sort of a nice idea, right? But I think what we now know, and we're very clear on, is what we're really up against. Or I hear people say things like, you know, um, Black History, Black History Month shouldn't just, it shouldn't just be a month. It's Black History is 365 days a year, right? And so again, we do those kind of, I don't know, is that a syllogism? I'm not sure, but we do those kinds of like false connectors and really kid ourselves. I think if nothing else, it's very clear now that we have engaged the structures as they are. They are powerful. They have historically been damaging and devastating and so on to our identity and to our communities. And so we shouldn't second guess the pioneers, I guess, or the founders of this discipline and field who maybe knew better, maybe kept it a little, kept that radical aspect in there. I think when I don't know, there's a connotation nice, like, I don't know how many, if you agree, but like, we have all these different incarnations. We've got African American studies, Africana studies, which is what my department's called. But there's something about Black studies. So I love this. When you say Black studies, it has this connotation of a bit more of a radical engagement. I guess when we think of like the National Council of Black Studies, the fact that they have retained that terminology, because it's my understanding is a lot of places are not using Black studies as much anymore. People change, what have you. But
we renamed my department a couple of years ago, and I was just, everybody, in my department who would hear this would know this. I was a huge advocate for Black studies because I think a lot of what you were saying, which is it denationalizes and actually sort of takes it outside of geography, sort of makes, I just think it has, radical in many ways in the sense of like Black Lives Matter, Black liberation struggle, the sort of cut, ways it attaches to different phrases, but also the way it just pulls itself, as you were saying, out of national narratives where there's always that temptation to say, like, let's take what seems like the margin and put it at the center with the other centers, right? 365 days a year, American history is African American history, all of these things. So sorry, I know I interrupted you, but
no,
departments to me is so fraught. We had as a department, it was much more fraught than I think I expected. But I don't mean fraught like we shouldn't have had that conversation or that was tragic. It was a question about the substance of what we do. And that's a question I think, I know now I'm turning this into a podcast with me as a guest, as I sometimes do, but, my PhD is in philosophy, and, philosophers, well, some of us like to say the one true philosophical question is, what is philosophy? And I think like part of what I'm hearing and what you're saying is like, we still have to ask that question, what is Black studies? What is the Black and Black studies? And
yes.
And that's a distinct question, and that's not a digestible question outside of the conversations that Black Studies has.
Yeah, that's right. Choices matter, decisions. I think we're within our bounds to make categorizations or say, this is that, or this is not that. Historically, I think Black Studies did that, has done that in ways that are very important and very needed. But again, I kind of like, I go back to, sort of some of the original thinking. That connecting with, communities, mass incarceration, for example, that was a key element in early Black studies departments. They would teach sometimes at UMass. I know they did that. Bracey and some of my other professors there. they had I think they actually offered a class in the prisons. I forget which one, but and we have seen some returns to that, so that's good. That's good stuff. It's important. It's very important, just to keep, again, on the rigor side, to demonstrate the academic excellence is important, because that always gets questioned. And at the same time, uh, keep pushing, because a lot of the, I was pretty, like, clear, during, George Floyd, and during, the summer of 2020, a lot of the protests and things that was going on. Like, a lot of those kids, like, people would say, "Oh, there's a lot of white kids out there. They're not all black," but these were the kids. Like, a lot of them, I think they were our, like, they were the kind of students that I've had for years and years and years, generations of, kids who took our classes, who got the aha moment and were really transformed and wanted to go out and, put their bodies on the gear of these social forces in a very serious and engaged way. Right? During the Black Lives Matter protests and so on, people noticed. People noticed. You know,
Hmm.
that's why the attack on critical race theory. They correctly, in some way, realized that the teaching, the pedagogy, the radical sort of traditions. I mean, if you're in a classroom and I play Sonia Sanchez poem to you, and we just sit there and listen to that, or Nikki Giovanni, or you're coming out of that classroom like wow, like a different person.
Yeah.
So we have that on our side. That's that is the power of our experience. Literally, all we have to do is showcase it, and it usually conveys itself. It doesn't reach everybody the same way because we don't all think the same way, but there's no denying, that power and connection is. Maybe it's something about people who have been very oppressed, pushed closer to something that resembles, or that not resembles, but that 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 resonates with that deep well of humanity in all of us. Right? I think there's something that happens. They're like, if you ever, if you ever gone to a black church, the feelings, the things might feel, wow, power, and so and a lot of people, a lot of our colleagues, for their classrooms, that is black church, in a sense, without
Yeah.
all the other, it's not religious, obviously, but it's not like that. But you're getting that kind of force, you're getting that soul power, you're getting that testimony, you're getting that energy. Not every day, because some days are not good. What I mean? Some days it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
let's
yeah,
just
yeah.
go
No, I
home,
know what you mean.
try it tomorrow again. But when it happens, it's when we can tap into it. I think we're tapping into a well of the voices of ancestors and a lot of wisdom that comes down through the centuries that says, keep going, keep on going. And that goes for not only that young student, whether they be black or not, but all of us colleagues, professors who do this, have taken on the handiwork of this Black Studies thing. You know, we hear it. We must all hear something like that. And so, on the face, it looks like, oh, this is a discipline and this is a department and we need to have a hall. This is Black Studies department's on room, floor 3 of whatever building. But once, but behind that is something that's so radically, it's so different from any other discipline or any other approach. You're just not going to get that. Maybe some things, sociology or some other things, but or philosophy, but you're not gonna, you're it pulls on all of those things, and that's what's nice about it. And when it's done well, when Black Studies is done effectively, done well, because sometimes we're accused of, oh, we don't have enough majors. How come the number of majors if what you're doing is so fantastic and so powerful, how come you don't have enough majors? Stuff like that. So we have to, that's important too, to shore up that element so that
Mhm.
because that will never change the ways in which departments are judged, measured, and
Yeah, yeah.
disciplines. That part that is slowly starts to change, but it won't. It's good to be about excellence too, though. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, I love this as a place to wrap up because, I mean, I think, we're you and I are talking. This will come out, in like 3-4 weeks from now. But we're just, not even we are exactly a full week into the rise of a far right government, and I think one of the ways to lean in these moments of crisis where something like the field of Black studies is put under this level of scrutiny is to say, well, we're talking about ideas in history and students make of them what they do. But then this other thing that you're talking about, which is that power of the Black studies classroom, which is actually not that, which is to say you exit a different person. And what would it mean for us to embrace that in this moment? That's dangerous. But to get back to, I'm making all these connections as I'm listening to you, to get back to your opening comment about the field, right? Well, those students put everything on the line so that we could have these jobs. What would it mean for us to just take a very minimal kind of risk and say that you will walk out of this classroom different? And I'm not ever going to say that's going to be different than that. What the different you walk out with, that's your own story. But let's not act like we're just reportage here.
That's right. No, and the give and take is a critical piece of that, and I think that's that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing a very reactionary, hard right, as you said, government, and I suspect, I don't know for sure, but I suspect behind those kind of politics, or anyone who would choose this kind of politics, is a lot of fear. It's fear behind it. And fear makes people do things like that, maybe. So I try not to, I don't know, everyone's got different reactions to what's going on now. Some people are like, just ignore it. Some people are like, Black women, we're tired. They're like, don't call us, and some others are, I mean, I guess my take on it is it's part of that heroic narrative of history too. You have sometimes the rise of a villain. Would the story in Egypt be as interesting of the liberation of people if you didn't have Pharaoh? Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Or would Birmingham be as interesting without like the police chief there and that kind of thing? You have a villain. You have I don't want to say a villain, but you have someone who's doing some very destructive things at the moment, seems to be totally able to do anything they want. And that can be very intimidating. It overwhelms you, it engulfs you, and makes you, which is what it's of course intended to do. It's intended to put fear. It's intended to push us back from our boldness as we have been displaying. How dare we, be proud and be strong. People I think that way. They're like, a few 50 years ago, you all were here, and now you're here. When we're nervous about it. We
Yeah.
weren't paying attention, I guess. I don't know. Also, but the problem is they'll always be flawed because they don't have the humanity and the humanity of Black people at the heart of it. See, people got to do that work first. If you haven't done that, and you have a misreading, of the larger story. And I guess I don't want to contradict myself of what I said earlier, but with all those gaps in American history, you can't understand it. You really cannot understand the history without those gaps. And that's what Black studies is to me, as a corrective. You'll always, as long as you have white supremacy and racism in the land, you'll need a corrective. There'll always be a need for us until that changes. If you get that together, then you won't need this. Then maybe Black history would be American history. It would naturally tell those tales as on par with all the other things. I mean, I don't think it could ever. You got to have both. American history. I mean, like, all the presidents up until 2008 were white men. So you got to have that history is not going to tell the tale, and then can't no one thing can tell it fully. But until that changes at the heart, then you'll always need a corrective, because your tendency over and over again will be to keep trying to disprove the humanity of Black people. We'll go way back, or even not even way back, not that long ago, the 90s, the bell curve, things like that. And you have to have like people writing, the mismeasure of man, and trying to be that the corrective things you got wrong, and so on. And so that's the fun. That's the good part, I think. That's when we get to just be the intellectuals. No, your analysis is wrong. You started off with the wrong thesis. That's all right. How could you have come out with a correct analysis when your hypothesis was off? Because you didn't think with this. You're thinking with your prejudices of the heart. There's no room for that in the academy. So then we get to be, the not bully. We'll support. We're not going to bully. But it's like, no. We've studied this. And we'll argue to the end of the earth. You'll always be sort of you'll always be impaired and not able to keep up, because you haven't done that change in your thinking. And if that's not at the heart, that's the difference. Black studies sees Black people as fully human, fully realized, without all the junk of the stupidity of the notions of white supremacy that have prevailed and seeped into the minds of too many people.
Look, if we can find a way to maintain both that sense of study, correction, and intellect while managing to survive these years and this attack. Although, as you said, no one has said Black studies; it's always Black history. But you wonder if those two come together. But
that's any day now, they'll figure that one out too.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Zebulon. This has been fantastic. I was looking forward to it, and this has been everything I was hoping in our conversation. So thank you for being part of the series. Thank you for your generosity and thoughtfulness in this conversation. Really just happy to have you as part of the Black Studies podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been a great exchanging of views and conversation.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.